So previously we looked at developing an inclusive school, and now we will move on to looking at building an inclusive classroom. So from an ecosystemic perspective, we need to remember that the classroom is a subsystem of the school, which means that it's self-contained within the larger school system. The classroom is also a microcosm of broader society, which means that the classroom, and the school for that matter, is a miniature representation of broader society, in that it encapsulates all the characteristics of society as a whole, such as class and race, language and gender. Classroom culture refers to how things are typically done in a particular classroom, which creates a characteristic atmosphere related to its culture. The culture influences all aspects of classroom life. It's a cyclical, dynamic process. It changes and it develops, and it has a fundamental impact on teaching and learning, and the personal development of teachers and learners. There is no one correct classroom environment that meets the needs of all learners, and it's seldom perfect for all learners. Hence, the teacher needs to be aware of the diversity of needs and the values of the classroom and be flexible and responsive to them. Physical factors in relation to the classroom are more obvious than other aspects. So teachers sometimes forget how much they impact on the life of the classroom. Only when these physical factors start to cause stress do they become concerns in the classroom. Some of these factors include space, noise levels, lighting and ventilation, temperatures, display possibilities, seating, facilities, and class size. Now think about your own personal experiences in terms of how physical aspects of the classroom positively or negatively affect the implementation of teaching and learning in the classroom. So instructional aspects relates to how the teaching and learning process actually happens, as opposed to how it is supposed to happen. And much of this relates to the hidden curriculum, which refers to the side effects of teaching. In other words, what is learned but not openly intended, such as the transmission of norms and values and beliefs conveyed in the classroom and the social environment. The way that the teacher interacts with learners and how they manage the classroom often more powerfully demonstrates what is expected from learners than what they actually say. So what you do is actually more important than what you say. Central teaching and learning principles in an inclusive, health-promoting classroom include a number of factors. So the first is active engagement, and this is used to optimize learners' development and motivation. You can promote and guide the natural development processes by creating opportunities for active exploration and adaptation. And here we refer you to Vygotsky. In other words, we learn through doing. This includes opportunities to act on information, thus enabling learners to take active, constructive control of their lives. This develops the belief in learners that they themselves can make a difference and set future-directed goals and achieve them. The next aspect is connecting, and this applies to psychosocial development. Effective connection means developing a caring relationship with learners so that they feel secure and more motivated to learn, with the help to learn better and help the teacher to assess how effectively they have learned. Affecting connection involves mediation and scaffolding of the child's learning. Now, facilitating interaction encourages active participation when the environment is free, accepting, and respectful of difference. Meaningful interaction leads to cooperative learning. There also needs to be flexibility, and the key to responding effectively to diversity in your class is to be sensitive to each learner's cultural and socioeconomic backgrounds and their holistic needs. Flexibility includes flexibility in ongoing interaction in your class, as well as flexibility in the way you organize your teaching. For instance, flexibility in interaction means understanding both learners' individual needs and their home circumstances, enabling teachers to respond to learners' different cultural worldviews, socioeconomic circumstances, and specific learning needs, drawing on different knowledge systems and indigenous knowledge systems. Flexibility in how you organize your teaching includes various methods of instructions to optimize learning and meet learning needs, such as involving time for additional support and mediation, and organizing specialized tuition and enrichment projects. Teaching and learning materials need to be accessible, relevant, and understandable. And in this way, it takes us back to education and diversity, where we speak about multicultural literature. So it needs to include different knowledge systems. For instance, your textbooks, your workbooks, your handouts, and your reference books. How you use this learning and teaching material to facilitate interaction impacts learning and relates to active engagement. So students must engage and learn constructively by reading, thinking, and talking about the information. Additionally, alternative sources of information, for instance, different books, handouts, and DVDs, music, and newspaper articles, are also important. In terms of the social aspects of the classroom, good interpersonal relations within the classroom between the teacher and the learner, and learners and learners, are critical in the process of developing an inclusive, effective classroom culture. Teachers bring their own identities and influences from their own social contexts, as well as their own personal talents, temperaments, and problems into the classroom, and so do the learners. And this influences social interaction, and therefore teaching and learning. Hence, it is vital that the teacher reflects on own personal attitudes, biases, and prejudices. For instance, around areas such as social class, gender, and religion, as well as their own self-esteem and sense of own competence. As learners pick up on the teacher's behavior and body language, even if it is not intended. It is the teacher's professional role to develop a high level of self-understanding in order to attend to these issues in a constructive way. Learners also bring social identities, personal problems, and issues into the classroom. However, they also have their own strengths and weaknesses and temperaments. Promoting strengths is one of the most effective ways of countering weaknesses and developing a sense of acceptance, inclusion, and well-being. Group dynamics refers to the type of interpersonal interaction that takes place when two or more people get together. The teacher needs to understand group dynamics in order to manage their class successfully, which includes being sensitive to the characteristic patterns of interaction In other words, the unwritten rules that govern the system. For instance, what is going on in groups? The teacher needs to identify the issues in order to understand and address or respond to them appropriately. When trying to understand what is going on in a group, the teacher needs to be able to observe not only the obvious, but the less obvious things, such as patterns of communication. Is communication clear or unclear? Is it direct or indirect? Talking at students as opposed to with them means communication runs in one direction only, from you to them, which suggests an autocratic style of leadership, which does not promote inclusion or well-being. She also needs to be aware of patterns of participation. Teachers need to ask who is or isn't participating, and when, and how, and why. What patterns are present and what are developing? These answers may reveal a pattern of power dynamics in the classroom, leading to tension. It influences the power relations between the teacher and the learner, and social relations between learners. What about patterns of decision-making and leadership? Do students have opportunities to participate in a confident and assertive manner? Are decisions and leadership roles taken by the teacher only, or are they limited to a few learners, or to the whole class for that matter? Who is benefiting? Is this in the interest of all group members? A democratic style of leadership involves the teacher at times making decisions, shared decision-making, or delegation. There's also patterns of group membership. Patterns of peer acceptance have effects on inclusion and well-being, as well as scholastic performance. Therefore, it is important to detect them in the class. Who is generally included or excluded in the groups? Why? And what subgroups have formed? Do the subgroups offer acceptance to those learners who are not accepted? Are they a source of conflict or are they problematic? And do they interfere with classroom life or have a negative influence? There is also conflict and diversity, and we need to ask ourselves, is there a general pattern of cohesion, or is the class divided and disjointed? Are learners who are different excluded or discriminated against? And what is this related to? For instance, class, race, or gender. How do you or your class handle diversity and difference? Understanding these different patterns is a complex but challenging process, but it is a good starting point to ask the following 3 questions. What is helping this class to work well as a cohesive group? What is hindering or blocking it from working as a cohesive group? And what can I do to address these blockages? Discipline is perceived as a key issue for teachers in the context of classroom management. And this is because one of the main aims of socialization, and therefore of education, is to inculcate self-discipline in children. Furthermore, when discipline problems occur, teaching and learning becomes difficult. When disruptive behavior occurs, it is difficult to address because it often involves conflict. Teachers need to reflect on their own feelings regarding interpersonal conflicts and how they respond, as this will inevitably affect conflict management in the classroom. So it is important to stop and ask yourself, Do I feel uncomfortable? Do I avoid conflict? Do I lose my cool and become aggressive? Or do I try and resolve it? Conflict management is a key life skill that needs to be learned, and the ideal is to learn to be assertive yet collaborative. Now, what does that mean? Learners and teachers also need to acquire the steps in problem solving, namely, define the problem, look for possible solutions, decide on a plan of action and address the problem, and carry out the plan and maintain it. And finally, evaluate the success and failures of the intervention. Punishment should be avoided, but may be needed at times. But ensure that when punishment is used, the following principles are applied. Clarify exactly what specific behavior and why the learner is being punished. For instance, the behavior, not the child, is unacceptable. Find appropriate punishment for the offense. That is constructive punishment that helps the learner learn something useful in the process. And do not delay punishments, as the learner needs to connect behavior with consequences. And finally, reintegrate the learner quickly and positively back into the class. Use praise for positive behavior rather than just punishing the negative behavior. The key is to try and use preventative measures to avoid conflict situations from becoming problems in the first place. Use person-centered approaches through developing life skills such as conflict management, problem solving, communication, and assertiveness training, and environment-centered approaches, for instance, rules of the classroom, to maintain a positive learning atmosphere. A democratic classroom is more likely to foster cooperative and true commitment. Now that we have completed this section on building an inclusive classroom, I would like to refer you to the case study in Donald, Lazarus and Muller, which has been uploaded to ECI. It is your task B of Unit 1, and I'd like you to answer the questions that follow. We will be reporting back in a forum discussion. So good luck, enjoy the case study, and we will see you in your lecture on Friday.